He thought his biggest surprise would be running into his ex at the grocery store, not coming home to find her mother hiding in his living room. But what began as an awkward confrontation soon unraveled. Secrets, regrets, and a connection no one saw coming. This is a story about heartbreak, unexpected friendship, and the kind of second chance that only shows up when you least expect it. What would you do if your past walked back into your life through a door you forgot to lock? Miller came home later than usual that Friday night, the city air heavy with the promise of rain. He had stayed behind at the firm to finish a design revision, and by the time he reached his apartment, dusk had settled in with the sullen weight of an early spring storm. The sidewalks glistened, neon lights streaked in the puddles, and David was grateful for the brief quiet that always seemed to hang in the lobby of his building. He pressed the elevator button and let his mind wander, replaying details from work, half dreading the emptiness of the place he now called home. When he reached his floor, something felt off. His apartment door, which he always checked and double-checked before leaving, was just barely ajar. He hesitated, heart thumping. For a moment he wondered if exhaustion was making him forgetful. Still, the unease lingered as he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The lights in his living room were on. The faint aroma of chamomile tea drifted through the air. And there, sitting on his sofa with a cup clasped between her hands, was Linda Barnes. David blinked, stunned. Linda was his ex-girlfriend's mother. She looked up, her face flushed with embarrassment, strands of silver hair falling from her loose ponytail. She was wearing a practical raincoat, the edges still damp, and her eyes darted nervously to the half-packed cardboard boxes David kept meaning to unpack. Linda, he managed, his voice rough with confusion. What? How did you get in? Linda stood, nearly spilling her tea in the process. David, I am so sorry. I know this is odd. I should have called. I just... She fumbled in her purse and produced a small, familiar key. I still had this from before when Julia and you were together. I kept meaning to give it back. I never thought I'd use it, but tonight I didn't know where else to go. David's tension eased, replaced by a different sort of discomfort. He had never reclaimed the spare key from Linda after Julia moved out nearly 8 months ago. It had never occurred to him that anyone but Julia might use it. He set his messenger bag down and took off his jacket, letting her words sink in. Linda's apology was genuine. There was a tiredness in her voice that made David see past his own surprise. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how small and lost she seemed standing in his living room. She was usually so composed, the sort of person who made order out of chaos. But tonight she looked out of place and deeply unsettled. It's okay, David said quietly. You're always welcome here. You know that. Are you all right? She hesitated before sitting again, fingers still wrapped around her mug. I had a fight with Julia. It was bad. I left the house and then I just started walking. I didn't even grab my umbrella. She laughed bitterly. I walked for over an hour. When I realized how soaked I was, I remembered the spare key. David felt something soften inside him. He could picture Linda walking the dark, wet streets, too proud to ask anyone for help. He walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on, offering her more tea. The routine of it steadied them both. They sat in silence while the water boiled. David let his mind wander to those old days when he and Julia would visit Linda's house for dinner, when he still believed his life would follow a straightforward path. Linda had always been the steady presence, the calm in the storm of his and Julia's volatile relationship. He poured the tea and brought it to her, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Julia is going through a rough patch. She's overwhelmed with school and work, and I think she's blaming me for a lot of it. I tried to help, and she told me she needed space. Maybe she's right, but I just needed to get out of there. David nodded, recognizing the ache in her words. Sometimes space is the hardest thing to give, he said, surprising himself with the honesty. Linda smiled weakly. You'd know, wouldn't you? The conversation drifted into gentler territory, the kind that only happens when two people are both a little raw and open. Linda asked about his job, and he told her about the pressures at the firm, the impossible deadlines, and the satisfaction he still found in designing spaces that made people feel at home. She listened intently, her librarian's curiosity peeking through her fatigue. They avoided the topic of Julia at first, but eventually the conversation circled back. Linda apologized again for letting herself in, and David reassured her. You never have to apologize for needing help, he said quietly. That's what friends do. Linda laughed, then a genuine sound this time. I suppose we are friends, aren't we, after everything? They drank their tea in silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain battering the windows. David felt the tension leave his shoulders. For the first time in months, he didn't feel quite so alone in his own home. The clock crept toward midnight. Linda made a move to gather her things, but David could see the reluctance in her movements. The rain was still coming down in sheets, and he couldn't imagine letting her walk back out into the storm. Stay, he said softly. It's late, and you shouldn't go out in this weather. You can have the guest room. Linda looked relieved, though she protested half-heartedly. Are you sure I don't want to impose? David shook his head. You're not imposing. Besides, I wouldn't sleep tonight if I thought you were out there in this weather. Linda smiled, gratitude shining through the exhaustion. She disappeared into the hallway to change into the dry clothes David offered her. As she moved about the apartment, David found himself remembering all the times Linda had made him feel welcome in her home. Now the roles were reversed. He tidied up the kitchen, lost in thought. When Linda returned, she looked more herself, the dampness gone from her hair, her features softened by relief. She thanked him again and said goodnight, her voice quieter than before. David waited until he heard the guest room door close before letting himself breathe. He stared out at the city lights, the sound of rain, a steady rhythm that echoed his own uneasy calm. He had not expected company tonight, much less the company of Linda. But now that she was here, the apartment felt warmer, more alive. He left the living room light on just in case Linda needed anything during the night, then retreated to his own room, lying awake for a long time, replaying the evening in his mind. He thought about Julia, her quick smile, her restless energy, the way things had unraveled between them. He thought about Linda, her resilience and kindness, and how strange it felt to see her so vulnerable. Most of all, he thought about how unexpectedly comforting it was to have someone else in the apartment, someone who understood loss and disappointment in a way few others could. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. David closed his eyes, not sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to find out. In the morning, he woke early to the sound of soft footsteps in the kitchen. Linda was already up making coffee, her movements familiar in a way that brought a quiet sense of peace to the place. They shared a simple breakfast, exchanging easy conversation, both a little embarrassed by the intimacy of their new arrangement. Linda offered to return the spare key, her fingers lingering on the metal as she held it out. David shook his head. Keep it, he said, surprising them both. You never know when you might need it. Linda looked at him, 1,000 unsaid words in her eyes. Thank you, David. As he left for work that morning, David felt a strange mix of emotions, uncertainty, hope, and a dawning sense that maybe, just maybe, something new was beginning. The sun broke through gray clouds the next morning, light falling in ribbons across David Miller's apartment. He was still getting used to sharing his space, even if only for a night. But he found himself surprisingly at ease as he moved around the kitchen. Linda Barnes sat at the breakfast bar, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, looking much more herself than she had the night before. They kept the conversation easy at first, talking about the weather and their mutual dislike of city traffic. Linda's gratitude was quiet but sincere, her words carrying the kind of warmth that seemed to fill all the empty corners of the apartment. David wondered how he could have ever thought of this place as cold or lonely. After breakfast, Linda stood to gather her things. She hesitated, then offered a sheepish smile. Thank you, David. I know it was strange showing up like that. I promise I won't make a habit of it. There was a hopeful note in her voice, as if she wished she could believe it herself. David shook his head and smiled. You don't need to apologize. I'm glad you felt you could come here. He hesitated, then added, if you ever need a place, again, just call. Really? She nodded, and for a second, David saw the fatigue in her eyes, the kind of tiredness that comes from caring too much for too long. As she reached for her bag, her phone vibrated on the countertop. Linda glanced at it, her expression darkening just a touch. She tucked the phone away, not explaining, and they both pretended not to notice. They walked together to the door. The hallway outside was quiet, just the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner on another floor. Linda paused before stepping out. I'll see you around, David. Maybe next time I'll bring you some of my banana bread. Julia always said you liked it best. I'd like that. The door closed softly behind her. He found himself standing for a moment, listening to her footsteps fade away down the hall, then turned back to the morning's quiet routines. He took a long shower, cleared away the breakfast dishes, and tried to focus on work. But his mind kept returning to Linda's visit and the way it had somehow shifted the atmosphere in his apartment. Later that afternoon, as he sketched out elevations for a new community center project, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Julia. Her name lit up his screen, familiar, but now oddly distant. "Hey, David, Mom says she stopped by last night. Hope it wasn't weird. Things have just been rough at home." He paused before replying, fingers hovering over the keys. "Not weird. She's always welcome here. Hope you're okay, Julia." He stared at his message, thinking about how much had changed since the days when Julia's texts could light up his whole day. Now every word seemed carefully measured, the spaces between them filled with things left unsaid. That evening, he tried to lose himself in a movie, but the story on the screen felt flat compared to the one unfolding in his own life. He was halfway through when there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find Linda again, this time with a paper bag in her arms. She looked sheepish. "Banana bread," she said, holding out the bag. "I felt silly for just leaving this morning." David took the bag with a grateful smile. "Come in. You want coffee?" She nodded, and soon they were settled at the kitchen counter, the scent of fresh banana bread filling the apartment. They talked about books. Linda's world as a librarian was full of stories David had never heard. She told him about her favorite regulars, the challenges of running a quiet library in an increasingly digital world, and how she sometimes lost herself in old paperbacks after everyone else had gone home. "You know, Julia used to sit with me in the reading room when she was little," Linda said, eyes soft with memory. "She would read every book she could get her hands on. Sometimes I think those afternoons were the only times we really understood each other." David listened, sensing the ache behind her words. "She always spoke so highly of you," he said gently. "Even after we broke up, she said you were the best part of her childhood." Linda smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "We both lost so much. I lost my husband, Julia lost her father, and then you two. Well, sometimes I think I lost a little part of her too when you broke up." The words hung between them, gentle but heavy. David nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. "It's hard. I never wanted to hurt her or you." Linda reached out and touched his hand. It was a simple gesture, but David felt the comfort in it. "Life is messy," she said. "None of us get through without hurting or being hurt. The best we can do is keep moving forward and maybe help each other along the way." The rest of the evening passed in that spirit. They shared stories, funny ones, sad ones, the kind you tell only when you feel safe with someone. David found himself laughing in a way he hadn't in months, surprised by how easy it was to talk to Linda. He realized that he had always thought of her as Julia's mother, but tonight she was just Linda, a person, not an extension of his past relationship. When Linda got up to leave, she paused at the door again, her hand on the knob. "Thank you, David, for listening. I haven't had someone to talk to like that in a long time." He smiled. "Anytime." After she left, David cleaned up the kitchen, feeling a new lightness in his shoulders. The apartment was quiet but no longer felt empty. He wondered if Linda felt the same as she made her way home. Over the next week, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes Linda would drop by with a book she thought he might enjoy. Other times, David would find himself passing the library on his way home, ducking inside just to say hello. These visits became little islands of calm in otherwise chaotic days, and both found comfort in their growing friendship. One rainy Wednesday, David stopped by the library just before closing. Linda was shelving books, her hair pulled back, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. Closing soon, she teased. "Unless you're planning on helping me shelve these last few books." He laughed, rolling up his sleeves. "I might need a little training." As they worked together, Linda shared stories about her late husband, about the years she spent balancing work and family. David listened closely, surprised by how much he wanted to know her, not as Julia's mother, but as Linda, a woman with her own hopes and scars. Linda, for her part, found herself opening up to David in ways that she had not expected. She confessed her fears of growing old alone, her worries for Julia, her longing for something meaningful beyond routine. David told her about his work, the satisfaction of designing spaces that made people feel safe, his fear of making the same mistakes in relationships. They were interrupted when Julia called. Linda excused herself to answer, her voice softening as she reassured her daughter. David watched her, sensing the complicated ties that still bound them all together. After the call, Linda returned, a wistful look in her eyes. "Julia says hi," she told David. He smiled. "Tell her I say hi back." Linda nodded, but then the silence stretched. She sat down, a stack of books in hand, rubbing the back of her neck. "David, do you ever think about starting over?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, realizing that for the first time in a long while he actually did. "Lately," he admitted, "I think about it a lot." Linda gave a small, hopeful smile. "Me too." They finished shelving the last of the books, the quiet between them no longer awkward, but full of new possibility. David helped Linda close up the library, and they walked out together, the evening air crisp and cool. As they parted ways, David hesitated. "Do you want to have dinner sometime, just as friends or whatever?" Linda looked surprised, then genuinely pleased. "I'd like that very much." They set a date for the weekend, both aware of the change, both a little nervous, but more excited than either expected. As David walked home, he realized the story of his life was shifting in ways he hadn't seen coming. The pain of the past was still there, but something new was growing, a quiet hope, fragile and real. And for the first time since Julia, David didn't dread coming home. Instead, he found himself looking forward to the next day and to whatever might come next with Linda. As the week unfolded, David Miller found his routines quietly shifting in ways he hadn't expected. He caught himself checking his phone for messages from Linda Barnes, wondering if she would drop by the library that afternoon or suggest another cup of coffee. The rhythms of his solitary life were changing, filled now with the anticipation of connection, a feeling he hadn't truly experienced since before his breakup with Julia. Saturday evening arrived with a gentle rain that tapped at the apartment windows, washing the city in silver. David spent the afternoon cleaning, fussing over the kitchen, as though Linda might notice a single out-of-place mug. He prepared a simple meal, roast chicken, fresh bread, a salad, and kept glancing at the clock, feeling a mix of nerves and hopefulness. Linda arrived carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers and wearing a blue cardigan that made her look both elegant and approachable. The sight of her at his door warmed the apartment more than any lamp could. When she handed him the flowers, David felt a shy happiness, surprised by how much it meant to him. "These are lovely," he said, finding a vase and arranging them with more care than he would have thought possible. Linda wandered into the living room, pausing to study the photos on his bookshelf. She lingered over an old picture of David and Julia at a beach, smiling despite the bittersweet memory. "You both look so young there," she said gently. David joined her, following her gaze. "Feels like another lifetime." Linda nodded, then turned to look at him. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem lighter lately. I think it's a good thing." David smiled. "I think it's you. I don't feel so stuck anymore." They sat together at the kitchen table, sharing the meal David had prepared. Conversation came easily, turning from favorite books to stories of their families, to travel and food, and the oddities of small-town life. David noticed how Linda's laughter would fill the space, making everything seem a little less empty. After dinner, Linda helped clear the dishes. As she rinsed plates at the sink, she glanced back at David. "You know, I haven't cooked with someone else since Julia was a kid. My husband used to say I was a control freak in the kitchen." David grinned. Then he never saw me chop onions. Their easy humor made the evening pass in a kind of soft glow. When the rain stopped, they moved to the living room. Linda settled on the couch, curling her feet beneath her, while David put on a jazz record that Julia had once given him as a birthday gift. The music was mellow, the perfect backdrop for quiet conversation. Linda's phone buzzed a few times during the evening, but she ignored it, her attention fully on David. Eventually, she sighed and glanced at the screen. "It's Julia," she said, showing him the name. David hesitated, unsure if he should say anything, but Linda read his uncertainty. "She worries about me, especially since her father passed. She's always tried to take care of me, even when I wanted to be the strong one." "Do you think she'd be upset if she knew you were here?" David asked gently. Linda shrugged. "Maybe at first. Julia doesn't always understand how lonely I get. She's so busy with her studies, her friends, but she'd want me to be happy." David nodded, sensing the complexity of their mother-daughter relationship. He thought of how Julia had once described her mother as the anchor in a storm. Now he wondered if Linda had always longed for someone to anchor her as well. They talked long into the night. Linda shared memories of her late husband, recalling his quirks and kindnesses, the way he used to make her laugh even in the hardest times. David listened genuinely interested, sometimes offering a story of his own. He realized how much comfort he found in Linda's voice and how her presence made his apartment feel like a home. As midnight approached, Linda stretched and glanced at the clock. "I should go," she said, reluctance in her tone. David walked her to the door. As she stepped into the hallway, she hesitated. "Thank you, David, for dinner." "For, well, everything," he smiled, feeling a courage he hadn't known he possessed. "Linda, would you like to do this again? Maybe next week?" She looked pleased, almost shy. "I'd like that very much." The next day, David received a message from Julia. Her tone was light but carried a trace of curiosity. "Hey, Mom said she had dinner with you last night. Hope you guys had fun. She seems happier lately." David replied honestly, "We did. She's good company. I think we both needed it." Later in the week, David stopped by the library after work. Linda was busy at the reference desk, glasses perched on her nose, but she looked up and smiled when she saw him. He waited patiently as she finished helping a student. Then they walked together through the quiet stacks. Linda confided that she was thinking of joining a local book club, but was nervous about meeting new people. David encouraged her, suggesting they attend together. She brightened at the idea, her eyes sparkling with something new. That Saturday, they went to the book club at a small coffee shop near the park. The group was welcoming, and Linda quickly found herself in animated conversation about her favorite novels. David watched her with admiration, glad to see her open up to others. On the way home, they stopped for ice cream, laughing at the silliness of ordering sundaes like teenagers. Linda told him she hadn't felt so carefree in years. David felt a similar sense of freedom, as if old burdens had finally started to lift, but change was rarely simple. The next evening, as David was working on design plans, there was a hesitant knock at his door. He opened it to find Julia standing there, hair damp from the rain, looking both determined and uncertain. "Can I come in?" she asked. David nodded, stepping aside. Julia entered, glancing around the apartment with nostalgia and a touch of discomfort. "I heard Mom's been spending a lot of time here," she said after a moment. David nodded. "She has. We've become friends." Julia looked down at her hands. "I'm glad she has someone. She's been so lonely since Dad died. I guess I didn't realize how hard it was for her, or for you." David felt the old ache between them, but also something new, an understanding, maybe even forgiveness. "I never wanted to make things complicated," he said quietly. "Your mom and I are just trying to find a little happiness." Julia nodded. "I know. I think I'm okay with it. I just need some time." They talked for a while, sharing memories of better days, their words gentle and careful. Julia left later that evening, and David felt a measure of peace settle over him. As spring moved into early summer, Linda and David's friendship deepened. They took walks together, shared quiet meals, and sometimes watched old movies until late at night. They learned each other's routines, their small quirks, and the silent comforts that could only come with trust. Linda grew bolder, inviting David to dinner at her place, where she introduced him to her favorite family recipes. David noticed how Linda's laughter seemed to fill her apartment, her confidence growing with every new day. Linda, in turn, noticed the way David looked at her, a warmth and respect that was different from anything she'd felt in years. One Sunday afternoon, as they sat on a park bench with ice cream cones, Linda reached for David's hand. He looked surprised but happy, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of them. They sat together in comfortable silence, aware that something precious was beginning for Linda, the possibility of love after loss. For David, the hope of a future unburdened by old heartbreak. And as the sun slipped behind the city skyline, both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The days after Julia's unexpected visit moved slowly, colored by a mix of uncertainty and fragile hope. David Miller tried to keep busy with work, but his mind drifted constantly to Linda Barnes. He replayed their recent conversations, the gentle humor they shared, and the comfort of sitting close without the pressure of expectation. At the same time, he worried about Julia. Her words were cautious but not as angry, and he wondered if she truly could accept the new bond forming between her mother and her ex. One Thursday evening, after a rainstorm left the city washed clean and fragrant, David returned from a long day at the firm to find a note slid under his door. The handwriting was neat, unmistakably Linda's. It simply read, "Coffee my place whenever you have time. I made lemon bars." The words brought a smile to his face. He set his bag down, changed into something more comfortable, and made his way down the hall to Linda's apartment. She opened the door with a warm smile, hair pulled back, cardigan sleeves rolled, the scent of citrus wafting out. Her apartment glowed with small lamps and soft music, a gentle cocoon from the city outside. They settled into her cozy kitchen. Linda poured coffee, offered him a lemon bar, and leaned on the counter, studying him in the gentle light. "Rough week?" she asked. David nodded. "Work's been a mess, and I keep thinking about Julia. I hope I didn't make things harder for you two." Linda shook her head. "You didn't. I talked to her again." "She's trying, David. She told me she just wants me to be happy, even if it's not easy to see at first. I think for her, it's just strange, her mother and her ex finding comfort in each other." David smiled ruefully. "It's strange for me, too, sometimes." Linda sipped her coffee and looked at him with a gentle seriousness. "Do you regret any of it, us? I mean," he thought about it honestly. "No, I regret not seeing you sooner, not talking more when we both needed someone." Linda reached for his hand across the counter. Her touch was warm and grounding, and they stood for a moment in companionable silence. Then, as if remembering something, she squeezed his hand and said, "Let's get out of here. I need some air. Want to walk with me?" They strolled out into the quiet evening, passing damp hedges and puddles reflecting streetlights. The neighborhood felt peaceful, almost suspended in time. Linda shared stories about the library funny moments with students, little victories that made her day brighter. David told her about a design he was working on for a park renovation, how he wanted to make the city a little softer around the edges. Their hands brushed together now and then, and eventually Linda laced her fingers through his as if it were the most natural thing in the world. David found himself relaxing into the moment, forgetting his old anxieties. When they reached the park, Linda paused under a willow tree, her breath fogging slightly in the cool air. "I was scared at first," she admitted quietly. "Scared of what people would think, scared of letting someone in again after losing so much. But you make it easy, David. You're kind. I haven't had that in a long time." David squeezed her hand. "You're braver than you know." They sat on a bench beneath the willow, letting the quietness settle around them. Linda rested her head on David's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her. He could feel the weight she carried, but also the quiet strength that lived beneath her gentle exterior. After a while, Linda straightened up, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "There's something else I need to tell you. I kept the spare key all this time, even after Julia moved out. I thought about giving it back, but it felt like I was still part of her old life, part of your life too. I didn't mean to invade your privacy." David shook his head, surprised by how little it bothered him. "You helped us both so much back then. I trust you. I always did. If you ever need a place to stay, or just to get away, you're always welcome." Linda's eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot." They made their way back to her apartment, and David stayed for another hour talking and listening. When he left that night, the world felt a little brighter, as if new possibilities had taken root. The following week, Linda invited David to dinner with her and Julia. Julia was visiting for the weekend, stopping by after a seminar. The atmosphere was tentative at first. Julia picked at her food, glancing between her mother and David, searching for signs of discomfort or awkwardness. But Linda was determined to set everyone at ease. She told an embarrassing story about David's failed attempt at baking during the holidays years ago, and soon all three were laughing. After dinner, Julia helped Linda with the dishes, leaving David to wander the living room, looking at the photos on the mantel. When Julia joined him, she paused beside a framed picture of herself as a child on Linda's lap. There was a silence that lingered, heavy but not unfriendly. Julia finally spoke. "I didn't expect things to work out like this. It's weird, but I'm glad you two have each other. I want Mom to be happy." David offered her a gentle smile. "We all deserve a little happiness." "I hope you find yours too, Julia." She nodded. "I'm working on it. I think we're all learning how to move forward in our own way." Linda entered, then drying her hands. She gave Julia a look of pride and affection, then glanced at David. For the first time in a long while, their little group felt like a real family, however unusual the circumstances. As the night wore on, Julia hugged her mother tightly, then turned to David and gave him a tentative but genuine hug as well. "Take care of her," she said softly. "She's tougher than she looks, but she still needs someone to look after her." "I will," David promised, feeling the truth of it in his heart. Spring slipped into summer. David and Linda's relationship grew steadier, filled with small routines and quiet joys. They went to farmers markets, cooked together, and sometimes spent lazy afternoons in the park reading, or just talking about the lives they'd lived and the hopes they still held close. David met some of Linda's friends from the library and was surprised by how quickly he fit into her world. There were challenges, too. Occasionally, Linda worried about what others might say about their age difference, or how Julia might really feel as time passed. David sometimes struggled with guilt about his own past with Julia, afraid of overstepping boundaries. But every time these doubts surfaced, they talked honestly, refusing to let misunderstandings fester. One Sunday, Linda invited David to join her for a small dinner party with two couples from her book club. David felt nervous but wanted to support Linda. The evening turned out to be a success. Everyone welcomed him warmly, and Linda looked at him with quiet pride as if to say he belonged. Later, as they cleaned up, Linda leaned against the counter and smiled. "You know, I didn't think I'd ever have this again, someone to share the little things with. Thank you for being patient with me." David kissed her cheek, feeling grateful himself. "Thank you for giving us a chance." That night, as he walked home under a sky full of stars, David thought of the journey they had taken together. What had started as a chance encounter born out of loneliness and happenstance had become a partnership built on honesty, trust, and gentle affection. And while the future was still uncertain, David felt for the first time in years that he was exactly where he was meant to be. A quiet, sunlit morning began with a sense of change hanging in the air. David Miller woke early, the city outside just beginning to stir, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment before getting up. He moved through the motions of making coffee, his thoughts already with Linda. It had been months since that night he had found her unexpectedly in his apartment, and in that short span his world had quietly but completely shifted. He and Linda had settled into a rhythm that felt gentle and honest. They saw each other several times a week, sometimes sharing meals, sometimes just walking together or reading in comfortable silence. Their affection was steady but unhurried. There were still moments when David wondered if their connection would hold in the real world, whether their age difference or the long shadow of Julia's past would one day draw them apart. But each time those worries crept in, he found reassurance in Linda's presence, her laughter, the quiet steadiness of her gaze. On this particular morning, David had promised Linda that he would help her clean out her storage unit. The task was an excuse, really, to spend time together and to sift through the odds and ends of the life she had built over the years. When he arrived, Linda greeted him in old jeans and a faded college sweatshirt, her hair tied up, a playful grin on her face. "Ready for dust and forgotten memories," she teased. He smiled, rolling up his sleeves. "Lead the way." They sorted through boxes of books, outgrown clothes, and stacks of Julia's childhood drawings. Occasionally, Linda would pause, holding something out with a fond smile or a sigh. David listened as she told stories about her late husband, about raising Julia, about the early days after moving to the city. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she grew quiet. David listened to it all, aware of how much she was sharing, how much trust there was in her openness. At one point, Linda unearthed an old photo album, its corners worn soft. She handed it to David, and they sat cross-legged on the floor, turning pages together. There were photos of Julia as a toddler, Linda's husband, standing behind her family holidays long before David had entered the picture. David saw Linda's eyes glisten as she pointed to a picture of her late husband holding Julia on his shoulders. "He was a good man," Linda said quietly. "I miss him even now, but I think he would have liked you." David touched her hand gently. "I wish I'd known him. I'm grateful for the way you both welcomed me when I was with Julia." Linda smiled. "You brought light to a hard time, even if you didn't know it." They spent hours in the storage unit, and by the time they finished, the sun was high, and both were tired, but content. Linda insisted on treating David to lunch, and they found a quiet cafe a few blocks away, sitting outside in the soft spring breeze. As they ate, David found himself watching Linda's face, noticing the lines of care and laughter, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. He felt a wave of gratitude for the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. Over lunch, Linda told him about a job opening for a head librarian position at the college. She hesitated, admitting that the prospect both excited her and frightened her. "It's more responsibility," she said, twisting her napkin in her hands. "More hours, more public speaking, more pressure. Part of me wants to try. Part of me wonders if I'm really ready." David encouraged her, reminding her of all the times she had risen to meet challenges before. You're stronger than you think, Linda. You care about your work, about your students. That's what matters. She looked at him for a long moment as if weighing his words. Then she smiled. You're good for me. You know that? He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You're good for me too. That evening, David returned home tired but happy. He spent the rest of the weekend drafting a design for a new community center, inspired by the stories Linda had told him of the people who came through her library. The work felt meaningful in a way that reminded him why he'd chosen architecture in the first place. As the weeks passed, life found a new normal. Linda visited occasionally, sometimes staying for dinner, and the dynamic between the three of them grew less tense. There were awkward moments, of course, a comment that reminded everyone of the past, or a look exchanged that said more than words. But slowly those moments faded, replaced by a sense of mutual respect and even tentative friendship. One afternoon, David and Linda attended a small gathering at Julia's apartment. Julia had invited a handful of friends to celebrate the completion of her master's thesis. There was laughter, music, and the easy camaraderie of people who had weathered storms together. At one point, Julia pulled David aside. She seemed more relaxed than he had seen her in a long time. I want to thank you, Julia said quietly, for being there for my mom, for being honest with me. I didn't know if I could handle all this at first, but I see how happy she is, and I'm glad you found each other. David felt a mix of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Julia. That means a lot. She smiled, giving him a playful nudge. Just don't mess it up. Okay. He laughed, the tension between them finally dissolving. I'll do my best. As summer deepened, David and Linda took a weekend to the coast. They walked along the shore, collected shells, and talked about everything and nothing. One evening, they sat on the porch of their rented cottage, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. Linda rested her head on David's shoulder. You know, I never thought I'd find this again, she said. Not after losing so much. But you make me feel like I can be myself, like I can start over. David turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You've given me a second chance, Linda. I didn't know how much I needed it until I met you. They kissed, the moment gentle and sincere, and David felt something settle inside him, a sense of belonging, of hope for the future. Back in the city, life continued its quiet rhythm. Linda applied for the head librarian position and was offered the job. David's work flourished, his designs gaining recognition and praise. Together, they created new traditions: Sunday breakfasts, evening walks, reading side by side in bed. They were not without challenges. Sometimes David's old insecurities would resurface, or Linda would worry about the future, but every time they faced those doubts together, talking honestly and supporting each other. One night after a long day, Linda surprised David with a small gift. Inside was the old spare key to his apartment, now on a new keychain. She handed it to him with a shy smile. I think you should have this back, but only if you want to give me a new one. David smiled, deeply touched. He handed her his current set of keys. Only if you promise to use it whenever you want. They laughed, the tension of old fears replaced by the comfort of shared trust. As autumn arrived, David and Linda sat together on her balcony, watching leaves turn golden red. The city below was alive with the promise of new beginnings. Linda leaned into David, her hand tucked in his, and for the first time in a long time, both of them felt entirely at home. The story ended not with grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty that comes from having weathered storms and found shelter in each other. David had never expected to fall in love with Linda, nor she with him, but in each other they had discovered the possibility of healing and hope, and the kind of love that feels all the more precious for its hard-won simplicity. And as the world moved on around them, David and Linda knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with open hearts and steady hands, trusting in the quiet strength they had built, one gentle moment at a time. David and Linda's story offers a heartfelt lesson. Sometimes life's most meaningful connections arise from unexpected moments, teaching us to embrace vulnerability and find healing in shared understanding. When David found Linda, his ex-girlfriend's mother, in his apartment, what could have been an awkward encounter became a turning point. Their bond, forged through late-night talks, shared banana bread, and quiet support, shows that friendship and even love can blossom in the aftermath of loss. Linda's courage to seek refuge and David's willingness to offer it reveal the power of kindness in mending broken hearts. Their evolving relationship navigating the complexities of Julia's presence underscores that healing requires honesty, patience, and the bravery to move forward despite past pain. This story reminds us that second chances often come disguised as discomfort, urging us to stay open to new beginnings, even when they defy expectation. David and Linda's quiet love built on trust and mutual respect proves that life's richest moments are found in the simple acts of being there for one another. It's a call to cherish the people who see us through our storms and to believe that hope can bloom in the unlikeliest places. Have you ever found unexpected connection in a moment of vulnerability? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how it shaped you. If this tale of healing and hope touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more stories that inspire. Let's keep celebrating the beauty of human bonds together.